It's called the Festival of Lights. It celebrates victories long since past and the survival of the Jewish nation.
As much as we think of it often as a military struggle, it was actually a spiritual struggle.
It celebrates a miraculous journey from darkness to light.
It means in all of our lives we can have light and make it last. We don't have to depend on external factors to make that inner light stay alive for us.
People have to be given hope that even though things might look bitter and terrible and dark, it will not last.
Sabeinu, Sabeinu, Sabeinu mituvecha.
Hanukkah, a festival celebrated by Jews throughout the world every December. It commemorates a historic event that took place over 2,000 years ago, when a band of brothers stopped a tyrant in his tracks. The heart of the story begins in Jerusalem, an ancient city in an ancient land.
What we're looking at is the southern part of the city of Jerusalem during the Second Temple period. It's quite obvious that in front of us we see common buildings, simple houses where the population at large lived. So we have three portions of Jerusalem: the upper city over there in the distance, the lower city, and then this area here just south of the Temple Mount. Historically, this area is probably the most ancient part of the city of Jerusalem, referred to as the city of David. It is here that we should look for the biblical Jerusalem. But clearly, for Jews of the ancient world, the Temple Mount, the temple, was the most important site on the planet. It was there that they found their access to God.
The temple was magnificent. It stood roughly twice the height of the Golden Dome that stands in the same spot today. There wasn't a spot in Jerusalem that you didn't have some glimpse, if not an absolute magnificent view of the actual temple compound. And that was its role. It was an inspiration. It was the high priest who everybody loved and inspired us with their pure devotion, their dedication to their service.
Pilgrims could enter from the south, and then they would turn, as it were, in this direction, towards the east. They would enter the inner courtyards of the temple from the east. There would be a general courtyard where anybody could mingle, men and women together in that outside courtyard. But if you wanted to offer up a sacrifice, you would have to continue towards the temple area, towards the west, as it were. You would go up 15 stairs through an archway, and you would enter the inner courtyard. That's where the main sacrificial activity took place. The main altar for sacrificing animals was outside of this very imposing marble building.
When you're in Jerusalem, you can do exciting things like this. I'm sitting on an ancient column. We're not 100% sure where this column once stood. One theory, I think it's persuasive, is that this column was moved at a later stage in history, but that it once stood, together with the other columns we see in this area, on the Temple Mount itself, just further northeast of where we are right now. And the idea that somehow these magnificent columns, that these works of art and beauty were also dedicated to our worship, and that they still exist today, is quite thrilling.
This Jewish life centered around the temple was about to change. A new, powerful and sophisticated civilization was emerging. This was the rise of ancient Greece.
The story really starts with the conquest of the land of Israel by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE. And this introduced the land into a whole new social, political, cultural reality, a world that we refer to as the Hellenistic world.
The cities along the sea, they became strongholds of the Greek rule in the country. And this also, you can explain it, because they were close to the Mediterranean. They were close to their mother cities, to the metropolis, in the Greek islands, in Greece itself, in Turkey, in other places, which also explains a very interesting fact that during our excavations, we found a big amount of Greek pottery, of Greek coins, and Greek inscriptions, which all of them speak of the Greek rule and of the Greek penetration, of this cultural penetration into the country.
This penetration began with settlements on the Mediterranean coast like this one excavated by Professor Moshe Fisher at Yavne Yam. The Greeks adopted a strategy of divide and rule. They split the Middle East region into 3 kingdoms. Israel would now be under the control of Greek Syria.
From the material here, we learn a lot about the everyday life. For example, let me see here this very nice piece of Greek pottery, which was brought to the country by the Greek inhabitants, but the Greek population, maybe by the rulers of the city itself, as it is the case for the pottery. We can see it here, still from the buildings used in the Hellenistic period in the 2nd century BCE.
We talk about Hellenization. Hellenization is a cultural phenomenon. This was the new culture that was introduced to the East. It wasn't a Greek conquest of the East. It was rather a synthesis. It was the meeting of East and West that created a new culture. And this culture was very attractive. It was pervasive, but it was also assimilatory.
The Greeks were interesting enemies for the Jews. Many of our enemies historically have been interested in genocide. The Greeks were not interested primarily in killing us, although we have records of many different massacres that took place in different battles, but that was not their agenda. Their agenda was, you can live as a Jew, be happy, go ahead. The key, of course, is that you have to embrace Greek culture.
They brought in all types of their games and their gymnasium, their education system, and their philosophy, and of course it was very attractive, both mentally and physically. The Greek philosophies were also attractive, just not only physical. And the Jews, in all ways, especially the intellectual ones, were attracted by the Greek philosophy. So there was a lot in Greek culture that attracted Jewish people. Some could just read the philosophy and continue to be traditional observant Jews. Others wanted to go all out and become completely Greek.
Greek culture would prove so seductive that some Jews would even alter their bodies surgically.
We know of several cases where the Jews were embarrassed by their circumcision, and at least one of these cases in which they attempted to actually put back on their foreskin and replace their foreskin in order to assimilate into Greek society. We're looking at a variety of different vessels that were used in the temple, both in the First Temple period and the Second Temple period, all of which were part of the alienation that the Greeks experienced. They didn't understand what this was about. They would abscond with many of these vessels and use them for their own mundane purposes. And again, they're part of their plan, part of their campaign in taking this and uprooting what was central in Jewish spiritual life was to convince the Jews of that Greek culture was the superior way to go. They were effective.
It was also the culture of the elite. And if you want to assimilate to the rich and famous, I mean, this is obviously something people always want to do. You don't want to be poor and downtrodden. Nobody wants to be. And they were occupied by the Greeks, and that was the higher society, and they wanted to assimilate to it.
The most important point is the art, the Greek art. which is actually an iconographic art. It shows the man, the woman in the center of everything, which was not shown in the Near Eastern art and, of course, not in the Jewish art.
Well, nakedness is one part and parcel of the idea of the whole person, the organic whole. Both mind and body was one. They educated in the gymnasium, which means exercise and nakedness. They wanted to teach both physical prowess and mental prowess. So what you see here is naked men, very commonly. The view of the man as a naked person is just showing his ideal beauty.
I don't think it was immediately attractive to all the people, but it was certainly attractive to the upper elements, the aristocracy, what we would call high society. These were the people who, by virtue of their being the rulers, would come into contact with foreigners. I think we tend to forget that beginning with Alexander, the great people started traveling around the world much more. There was a lingua franca in all of the Near East, and that was the Greek koine, or common Greek language. And this aristocracy obviously rubbed shoulders with their peers, be they in Egypt, Syria, and all parts of the Middle East, and even as far as Greece ultimately. So they wanted to feel as if they belonged.
We're standing in the old city of Jerusalem in an archaeological museum that contains, among other relics, life as it was 2,000 years ago during the end of the Second Temple period. This is the upper part of what's today the Jewish quarter that was once upon a time the home to wealthy priestly families. The theory goes that these are homes that we're looking into, and homes of considerable wealth that's reflected by the elaborate mosaics, by the tables, by the pottery. Clearly people of means were able to live here. The reason why they believe this was priestly is the priestly class had to be concerned with ritual purity. In each home was a private ritual bath, which was in those days seen as something elaborate and perhaps even a little decadent to have your own private mikveh or ritual bath.
While one segment of Jewish society found Greek culture so attractive, another was totally resistant. This clash of civilizations would ultimately lead to a split, shaking the very foundations of Judaism.
There's a beautiful story about one of the great Greek thinkers, Aristotle, who once met a Jew, and he was impressed by this Jew, right? And says that this Jew, can I use some Greek? Hellenikos en ute dialecto monoin alakai te psyche. This Jew was Greek, not only by virtue of his dialect, but by virtue of his psyche. Meaning, if you spoke Greek, if you thought Greek, you were Greek.
The traditional Jews were aghast at the building of a gymnasium in Jerusalem. And the Hellenized Jews wanted to become completely Greek. And the traditional Jews kept the circumcision, kept all the other laws of the Bible, and just could not understand the attraction of Greek culture to in place of their traditional culture. There was just no understanding between the two cultures.
It was a struggle that's reflected in the people living in these homes. These were priests, and they had assimilated. They'd become highly Greek in their outlook, in their way of life, and that's reflected in the, what would be considered from a Jewish perspective, almost excessive focus on the material.
We tend to forget something. Jews could not eat with others, could not marry with others. In Greek eyes, that was often considered misanthropic. If you don't eat with us, if you don't marry our children, does that mean you think you're better? Are you looking down upon us? And so it went against the grain of Hellenistic ideology at the time, an ideology that basically tried to say we are one global village. And here are these Jews claiming, well, we don't want to be part of that global village because it impinges on our religious sensitivities.
The struggle that really is the struggle of the Hanukkah story, that is the struggle that the Hasmoneans had, was, as much as we think of it often as a military struggle, was actually a spiritual struggle. It was a struggle that the Jews had with Hellenism, with Greek ideals that focused on the individual, on this world, on beauty, on youth, where the Jewish values were elsewhere. We're using this world to attain a higher spiritual kind of perfection.
The story of Hanukkah started with the Greek conquest of the Middle East over 2,000 years ago. For 150 years, the Jews remained autonomous. But in 175 BC, a new ruler ascended the throne, and things were about to change.
The events took a radical change for the worse, as far as Jews were concerned, in the year 175, when a new emperor, or rather a new king, arrived at the Syrian throne, Antiochus IV, known as Antiochus Epiphanes. Somewhere around the year 172, 171 BCE, we are told that Jerusalem apparently became a Greek polis known as Antioch, named after the emperor, or the king, in Syria. This was a radical change, because this introduced Greek institutions into the city of Jerusalem. Jews were probably convinced that their religious life was in danger.
And they were right to be concerned. As unrest increased, Antiochus defiled the temple, placed Greek gods on the altar, banned the study of the Jewish Bible, the Torah, and outlawed many of the practices of Judaism. This led to what is known as the Maccabean Rebellion, the year 167 BC.
There was one family, Matityahu and his sons, and they had left Jerusalem because they felt in Jerusalem the persecution against the Jewish people was very strong, because whoever resisted the Hellenist secular attitude, philosophy, was put to death. And they felt they couldn't live under such incredible difficulty. They were priests, they were Kohanim. They served in the temple. And the temple itself had become a symbol of great conflict.
Finally, Matisyahu, who was the father of the 5 sons, stepped forward and acted courageously and resisted the Greek persecution and assumed an unlikely role of a warrior. And he and his sons took to the mountains and became guerrilla warriors against the Greeks.
So this small group of people, Matityahu, and led by his son Yehuda Maccabee, Judah the Maccabean, they put together a very small army, and they attacked the huge Hellenistic Greek army.
The Maccabees drew the Greeks into the hills around Jerusalem to fight. They kept winning battle after battle, even though they were so few.
You can understand that they were wandering a lot in the area, and that's the only way that we can understand how they knew so well the country. Now, if you know the country, you have a big advantage on the enemy. Because the Greeks were going with big armies, 10, 15, sometimes 30,000 soldiers going together with elephants, they wanted to go to Jerusalem. Now, how such an army will go? Exactly like today, on the main road. Judah Maccabees knew when they were coming. He had a wonderful intelligence. This is number one. And when they were coming, he would tell, we don't know how, but to the hundreds of villages that had in each of them some dozens of fighters, to get together, so we'll recruit them. He will come, that will come, will reach the bypass in the mountains. They will wait to them in these bypasses and attack them secretly.
They choose the moment of attack, the place of attack. They know that the Greeks or the Macedonian armies were built along lines that suited fighting on level ground in the plains. The phalanx, which was the mainstay of the Macedonian army, lost its potency once it was drawn up into the hilly area, and the Hasmoneans, of course, make the most of this. They lie in ambush when the phalanx is forced, as it were, into disarray, very narrow passages through hills, and that's where Judah Maccabee time and again waits and ambushes a Greek army trying to link up with Jerusalem.
As the war escalated, the Maccabees targeted Greek cities along the coast to prevent supplies and reinforcements from reaching Jerusalem.
One of the targets of the Jews, of the Maccabees, was to reach the coast, the Mediterranean coast. And it is everywhere in the book of Maccabees we find these portions describing the target. We know it from Judah Maccabeus, from the beginning of the revolt, that they tried to catch, to put their hand on Ashdod, Jaffa, and other sides. And from this point of view, we are happy and actually lucky to have a quotation from the book of Maccabees telling us that Judah Maccabeus, he put the fire on the ships of the Greeks in the harbor of Yavne Yam, of the harbor of Yamniton Limen, and the glares of the fire were seen in Jerusalem, so far away in Jerusalem, which is actually not, it's just a story, it's very nice. Now, another very interesting point and very also feature in the area is the fortress. The harbor fortress existing from the Bronze Age throughout the whole existence of the site. As you can see from you see the different layers in the profile, which are going down to some structures where the huge stone is, and there are some walls down, probably from the Hellenistic period, the fortress of the Hellenistic period, which was used for the Greek forces, for the Greek army, the military, to come, to enter the country, and to begin their actions against the rebels, the Jewish rebels in the mountains, the Maccabees.
Judah Maccabee did probably one of the most brilliant things by drawing up a mutual defense treaty with the Roman Republic. Now, clearly, I doubt if the Romans in the Senate breathed a sigh of relief knowing that Judah Maccabee and 300 of his farmers were on the Roman side. But this was Roman policy, to divide and rule. In other words, the Romans would naturally support any rebellious movement in the East because that would of course, weaken the great Hellenistic powers that Rome intended ultimately to subdue. And so the Hasmonean campaign, or the Hasmonean uprising, fit perfectly, almost like a glove, with Roman policy in the East at the time. What happened during those 3 years of warfare was there was a Greek garrison in the city of Jerusalem, but it was isolated by the Hasmonean supporters around the city, and the Greeks would try to send, as it were, supporting forces to link up with that garrison. Judah was successful time and again, both in the north, the south of Jerusalem, and the western areas of Jerusalem. Judah was successful in preventing those Greek forces from linking up with their garrison after 3 years. With not having achieved any support from the outside, the Greek forces in the city could not keep Judah from re-entering the town, re-entering the temple, and taking over, as it were, the Temple Mount.
The first thing they did when they came into the temple is they removed the pagan symbols, the idols, and they wanted to light the menorah. And of course, the reason why they wanted to light the menorah is because it was a symbol of victory. It was a symbol of light over darkness.
The oil that is in our story of Hanukkah was actually kept in a flask that resembled and may have actually been identical to the flask that we see in front of us. The miracle we know of Hanukkah, the miracle, there's one central miracle, is when they entered the temple compound In the secular calendar, we would date this 164 before the Common Era. They entered and they discovered just enough oil to light for one day. And according to our tradition, this light they were able to use and light the menorah that the seven-branched menorah, which is part of the intrinsic worship in the temple area, and they were able to use this oil, and it lasted for 8 days.
And this was the miracle of Hanukkah, the miracle of the Great Revolution, the miracle of finding the oil and the oil lasting for so long, and the fact that a handful of people, a small group of people, actually won the war.
עברנו הרבה מאוד ניצחונות. ניצחנו והצלחנו לגאול את בית המקדש. ועכשיו לזכר הנס הגדול, מעתה ועד עולם אנחנו נחגוג את חג החנוכה מכ"ה בכסלו למשך 8 ימים, בשמחה ובגיל.
This is the story of Hanukkah, commemorating the recapture and rededication of the temple.
At the time, the majority of Jews recognized this incredible miracle. They realized that they were misled. They realized that they were guided in a bad way. They realized they were lied to. When they saw that Matityahu and his sons had this unbelievable miracle, it was impossible for a handful of people to win a war against this incredibly powerful army. The people in Israel, the people in Jerusalem, felt that they wanted to be part of this, that somehow this veil was lifted.
The Hasmoneans retook control both as priests and as rulers of a new, unified, liberated Jewish nation. They remained in power for nearly 100 years.
Light was introduced into darkness. Now, it's very important to realize that one of the great symbols of Hanukkah, in fact, it's called the Festival of Lights. One of the great symbols of light of Hanukkah is the light of Hanukkah.
There are 8 nights of Hanukkah that we celebrate. 7 is that in spiritual, mystical terms, 7 is the idea of this world. God created this world. It took 7 days. The 8th, the number 8, transcends that. And everything you see in Jewish tradition in which the number 8 appears in a prominent way represents that transcendence. It's the 8-branched candelabra that we light on Hanukkah is a distinct one that really is about the Jewish people. It's about transcending the limitations of the physical world.
Today, Hanukkah is a festival enacted on the streets of Israel and around the world. It celebrates the victory of a small group of men against the might of the Greek army. Preparations for Hanukkah begin in earnest in the days leading up to the festival.
Every year, in every Jewish home, on the...
Meanwhile, in South Africa, Jewish children learn about Hanukkah in their classrooms.
And it burned for 8 nights and 8 days. Like, it kept on burning until they could go to the place where they get the oil, manufacture the oil, and bring it back. And ever since then, in our homes, every single night, we light Hanukkah candles. We want the very young children to know that even though they may be young, they may be small, immature, or whatever, each one of them is a light in this world. Every person that God puts into this world is a potential for powerful light, a metaphor, of course, for goodness, for deeds of kindness, for uplifting, for comforting, for bringing warmth to this world. And so that's what we really want the children to know from the time that they're small, that the idea of them being a light starts even now.
Every person, young and old, each day must do what's right. I may be young, I may be small, but I can add more light.
Back in Israel, preparations for Hanukkah continue in homes around the country. As many Jews from around the world do, Leonard and Ronit Sunday from South Africa came here 11 years ago to raise their children in a Jewish state. They're getting ready for the first night of Hanukkah.
The reason why we have a shamash is because you're not allowed to use the light of the Chanukiah to do anything, to read by it, to see by it, to navigate your way through the house. So we basically have a candle that's not part of the Hanukkah lights. It's an additional candle, and so any light that's given off is as if it's coming from this one candle, and then we don't have the problem of using the light of the other candle. Amen. Amen. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו להדליק נר של חנוכה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שעשה ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם The significance of the hymns, well, there's basically two songs that are sung. One is Hanero Talalu, which just basically explains in song what these candles are, what the purpose of the candles are. The song says it reflects on the miracles that were done over this period. Also explains how, as I explained to children outside, we're not supposed to use the candles for light themselves, but the purpose of the candles is just to fulfill the obligation of lighting candles, and not for some other practical use around the house. The second one basically traces through Jewish history and expounds on how through different generations there were nations and leaders that rose up to try and fight against the Jewish people, to eradicate the Jewish people, and how they rise and eventually they fall and the Jewish people still remain.
Oh, Hanukkah Sameach. Wow. Sameach. Toda, thank you. Wow. Homemade donuts. Wow, look fun.
Oil is central to the symbolism of Hanukkah, so it's customary to eat food that's been fried in oil. In Israel, people eat donuts, known in Hebrew as sufganiyot. In other countries, it's potato pancakes or latkes.
I'm making the recipe from the newspaper, from this weekend's newspaper, where there's a whole lot of recipes, the different kinds to make, and there was a whole lot of different toppings. Instead, if you wanted sweet, my kids like it sweet with cinnamon and sugar, but if you wanted a whole lot of different varieties, so it's become now quite like a gourmet thing in Israel around Hanukkah time to all different kind of potato pancakes that you can make. One of the things that the Greeks forbade the Jews to do was to learn the Torah, to learn anything related to Judaism. So what they used to do is when the kids were sitting and learning, they used to see somebody coming past, they used to take out a spinning top and pretend to be playing with a spinning top, and then they wouldn't be accused of learning the Torah. On the spinning top itself, there's letters written which says, it's in Hebrew, Nes Gadol Haya Po, which says a miracle happened here. And there's a whole lot of games which the kids play using those letters. In South Africa, it would be Nes Gadol Haya Sham. There was a great miracle over there. Chanukah here, you have a much... I mean, this is where it happens. It was here. It happened here.
And this whole area is so rich from that time of ruins and caves from the Maccabean. It really hits home that, you know, they were really here. When we go walking in the hills, they walk those very same paths that we walk in now. And it really brings, especially the miracle of Hanukkah home.
In South Africa, you would very much be inside your house, just your family together. You would light your Chanukiah. And I'm not even sure, people will put it by the window, but I'm not sure how many people will go around and see. We're celebrating in Israel, so it's outside, and the kids we light the candles outside, and the kids like to go and see the neighbors lighting and see everybody lighting the Hanukkah candles. If you take a drive or if you take a walk around and you can see everybody's Chanukiot, the menorahs outside, it's beautiful, and my kids also like to go out and see that.
During the evening service at the synagogue, a special Hanukkah prayer is added.
In the days of Matityahu, the son of Yochanan, the high priest, the Hasmonean and his sons, when the wicked Hellenic government rose up against your people Israel to make them forget your Torah and violate the decrees of your will, but you in your abounding mercy stood by them in the same time of distress.
Most of Jewish life is very much performed within the confines of the house of the synagogue. There's normally not very much, or there's never any evangelizing, there's normally not much publicity surrounding Jewish customs and Jewish rituals. Hanukkah is one of those exceptions where there's the idea of publicizing the greatness of the miracle and making that as known as possible, and that's why we light outside, and that's why we light in these particular hours, and hence the preparation that to get the time just right, that when everybody's coming back from work, and that's when the candles will be most seen.
Here on the streets of Tel Aviv, Hanukkah is also celebrated. Israelis, whatever their background, find their own significance in the story.
All the family is coming to my house, the grandchildren, and we always said that ladlik nerot, to put the light, and we make sufganiyot, the special food, and we sing together. It's nice. It's like a Christmas. It's close to the Christmas, no?
It's a spiritual event that a little voice, a little light lasted for 8 days. But it means in all of our lives we can have light and make it last. We don't have to depend on external factors to make that inner light stay alive for us.
Well, the lesson that we can learn from Judah Maccabean and the story is that we're still living on our swords, and we still have to defend our border, and we still have to believe in God that will help us be here.
Well, Israel has enemies, and these enemies still want to destroy it. So I think it has still a meaning.
We are standing in a courtyard in the old city of Jerusalem by a military monument, a memorial to soldiers who fought valiantly for the Jewish people. In this case, this is a monument to the Battle of 1948, what's referred to often as the War of Independence. The military and war and battles, soldiers, the army, these are prevalent themes in the modern life of a Jew, and particularly of a Jew who lives in Israel. And it may be because of this prevalence of the military in their cultural life that the story of Hanukkah has resonated with Israelis across the board. What's ironic about this is that the military aspect of Hanukkah is played up, and the irony is in the fact that the Talmud and Jewish tradition barely focuses on this. The military aspect is besides the point. What is important? It's the fact that God saved us.
Hanukkah celebrates the journey from darkness to light, a journey that we can all relate to. It brings these friends together to explore its deeper meaning.
For me, the central message is that everybody goes through darker periods of difficulty, and where they feel oppressed and they feel that they don't know how they're ever going to get out of that situation, and that they shouldn't despair from it. And that that it should be a situation that they know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And whatever appears to be impossible to overcome certainly can be overcome, and they will come out of it.
I just want to add that I think that in South Africa, I always think that a person should always concentrate first on themselves, and then their family, and then their neighbors, and we can look at improving ourselves and within our own context, and don't have to search so much outwards. We can always focus more inwards.
Part of where we've gone wrong, all of us, is in the pursuit of material wealth. And what happens is when you pursue material wealth, you tend to trample on people. You become caught up in it, and you want more, and it's a never-ending there is no satisfaction.
Yeah, well, we see that from the recent stock market crashes that have hit America and then the rest of the world, and the repercussions of it, that you think you've got a big bank balance on Monday, and by Tuesday it's been halved, and on Wednesday it's gone down even further. And it's that these things are not in our control, and that we really have to be focusing on the values that really are important in this day and age, and that Hanukkah makes us focus more inwardly on our families as opposed to acquiring wealth.
Everything that we're running after, physical possessions and all the luxurious lifestyle. So what am I going to do with it? Is it an end in and of itself, or is what I'm going to create out of it? Am I going to make a beautiful home and have, and make a warm, loving home for my family and for my children, for my friends and for my community? And am I reaching out and I take that candle and I ignite it with that flame, and I'm using it for a good purpose.
Hanukkah goes far beyond the Jewish community. There's a message to every community in the world, because in every part of the world we find this or that problem. And people have to be given hope that even though things might look bitter and terrible and dark, it will not last. There will be someone or a group of someones that will effect change.
It is about proclaiming to the world that this is God's world, that His will be done, and that we are messengers of God to bring goodness to this world.
can't always live based upon the influence of the environment. We have to create, in a sense, our own environment. And this is why in difficult economic times, what do we have to do? What we have to do is to learn to live with hope and with strength.
It certainly wasn't easy what the Maccabean went through, and the people being killed, and it was a bad time. It was a real bad time, and the people they persevered.
There's probably another message now for South African perseverance through some tough times at the moment as things settle down. There's certainly a message there of perseverance to get through the tough times and to reach that light that, as Ronit described, that light that Hanukkah tries to bring to the world.
Negativity, evil, darkness might have its moment, but it doesn't last forever. There is a time of reckoning. There is a time when the light will be reintroduced. There will be a time of rededication.